Hello, Julian here, and this is episode 3 of Reflections on Fromm. In our Fromm class at Miami Valley School, we're looking at Erich Fromm's works, such as Man for Himself, and trying to apply them to modern society. You've all heard the expression, the end justifies the means. Today, we're going to talk about Fromm's approach to what he calls the problem of means and ends. The problem of ends and means has been formulated by Spencer very clearly. He proposed that pleasure connected with an end necessarily makes the means to this end also pleasureful. At first glance, that concept might seem logical. For example, there are many people who enjoy writing and not just enjoy having the final product of the book that they've written, but actually enjoy the process of writing itself. And yet Fromm is quick to note that this is obviously not the case much of the time. Many acts preparatory to a desired end are not pleasureful. If a sick person has to endure painful treatment, the end in view, his health, does not make the treatment itself pleasureful. In order to achieve a desired end, we do many unpleasant things, only because our reason tells us we have to do them. At best, it can be said that the unpleasantness may be more or less diminished by the anticipation of the pleasure in the result. The anticipation of the end pleasure may even outweigh completely the discomfort connected with the means. But it doesn't end there. As Fromm writes, more significant are aspects of the problem which can be understood only by considering unconscious motivations. The example that Spencer gives is that of a businessman deriving pleasure from keeping his accounts correctly. In Spencer's view, the pleasure in the means, bookkeeping, is derived from the pleasure in the end, the enjoyment of life or duty. Fromm realizes that there are two problems with Spencer's approach. First of all, the end result that a person might be thinking about consciously could be completely separate from what that person conceives of subconsciously. A person may think that his aim or his motive is the enjoyment of life or the fulfillment of duty toward his family, while his real, though unconscious aim is the power he attains through money or the pleasure derived from hoarding it. And, perhaps more importantly, the pleasure derived from the end result may be completely separate from the pleasure related to the means. A case in point would be an obsessional businessman who enjoys his bookkeeping activities tremendously and is greatly pleased when his accounts prove to be correct to the penny. If we examine his pleasure, we will find that he is a person filled with anxiety and doubt. He enjoys bookkeeping because he is active, without having to make decisions or take risks. If the books balance, he is pleased because the correctness of his figures is a symbolic answer to his doubts about himself and about life. Bookkeeping to him has the same function as playing solitaire might have for another person, or counting the windows of a house to still another. The means have become independent of the aim. They have usurped the role of the end, and the alleged aim exists only in the imagination. With respect to modern life, Fromm remarks, activities which are means to ends have more and more usurped the position of ends, while the ends themselves have a shadowy and unreal existence. People work in order to make money. They make money in order to do enjoyable things with it. The work is the means, the enjoyment, and the end, but what happens actually? People work in order to make more money. They use this money in order to make still more money, and the end, the enjoyment of life, is lost sight of. People are in a hurry and invent things in order to have more time. Then they use the time saved to rush about again to save more time, until they are so exhausted that they cannot use the time they saved. We have become enmeshed in a net of means and have lost sight of ends. The overemphasis on ends leads to a distortion of the harmonious balance between means and ends in various ways. One way is that all emphasis is on ends without sufficient consideration of the role of means. The outcome of this distortion is that the ends become abstract, unreal, and eventually nothing but pipe dreams. The isolation of ends can have the opposite effect. While the end is ideologically retained, it serves merely as a cover for shifting all the emphasis to those activities which are allegedly means to this end. The motto for this mechanism is, "The ends justify the means." The defenders of this principle fail to see that the use of destructive means has its own consequences which actually transform the end, even if it is still retained ideologically. Spencer claims that, supposing it consistent with the maintenance of life, there is no kind of activity which will not become a source of pleasure, if continued, and that therefore pleasure will eventually accompany every move or action demanded by social conditions. Spencer touches here upon one of the most significant mechanisms of society, that any given society tends to form the character structure of its members in such a way as to make them desire to do what they have to in order to fulfill their social function. What Fromm realizes is that Spencer fails to see that in a society detrimental to the real human interest of its members, activities which are harmful to man but useful to the functioning of that particular society can also become sources of satisfaction. Fromm writes, "Even slaves have learned to be satisfied with their lot, oppressors to enjoy cruelty. The cohesion of every society rests upon the very fact that there is almost no activity which cannot be made pleasurable, a fact which suggests that the phenomenon that Spencer describes can be a source of blocking as well as of furthering social progress." Just because Spencer is right in proposing that every socially useful activity can become a source of pleasure, he is wrong in assuming that therefore the pleasure connected with such activities proves their moral value. Only by analyzing the nature of man and by uncovering the very contradictions between his real interests and those imposed upon him by a given society can one arrive at the objectively valid norms which Spencer strove to discover. His optimism with regard to his own society and its future, and his lack of a psychology which dealt with the phenomenon of irrational cravings and their satisfaction, caused him unwittingly to pave the way for the relativism in ethics which today has become so popular. The relativistic position proposes that value judgments and ethical norms are exclusively matters of taste or arbitrary preference, and no objectively valid statement can be made in this realm. But since man cannot live without values or norms, this relativism makes him an easy prey for irrational value systems. He reverts to a position which the Greek Enlightenment, Christianity, the Renaissance, and the 18th century Enlightenment had already overcome. The demands of the state, the enthusiasm for the magic qualities of powerful leaders, powerful machines, and material success became the sources for his norms and value judgments. Let's summarize what we talked about today. First, we discussed the problems with Spencer's theory that a pleasurable end result necessarily implies that the means of getting there are also pleasurable. Then we looked at the all too real disconnect between ends and means in modern society. We often do things to achieve goals that are never reached. Finally, we realized that deriving satisfaction from something does not necessarily imply that it is beneficial to real human interest. That concludes the third episode of Reflections on Fromm. If you liked this video, why don't you check out some of the other students' responses on the YouTube channel? Farewell, and see you next time!